Welcome. Let's open our next scroll and begin. The king woke before the bell. For a long moment, he remained beneath the heavy woolen blankets, listening to the quiet weight of the castle around him. The chamber was dim, lit by the bright and lively glow of a fire that danced across the hearth. Flames leapt and flickered, casting warm golden light against the stone walls and sending shadows that moved with a rhythm all their own. Ash swirled lazily in the glow, but the fire was alive, breathing life into the room. Beyond the narrow stone windows, winter pressed close. Snow fell steadily, gathering against the glass and drifting downward into the courtyard below. The wind moved slowly around the tower, sighing against stone that had stood through centuries of colder nights than this one. The castle held its breath, wrapped in snow and silence. The king exhaled, and the faint cloud of his breath lingered in the air before fading. Winter mornings always carried this stillness, a pause between warmth and cold, between rest and the obligations that followed waking. He shifted slightly, feeling the weight of the blanket slide across his shoulders. The stone beneath the bed was cold, even through the thick rugs laid for the season. The smell of wood smoke, ash and wool filled the chamber, familiar and grounding. This room had changed little over the years. Kings before him had woken here, listening to the same winter winds, feeling the same pull of the day waiting beyond the door. Eventually he sat up. The movement stirred the chamber just enough for the fire to respond. Flames leaping higher and shadows dancing more vividly across the walls. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and rested his feet on the cold floor. The chill rose immediately through the soles of his feet, sharp and bracing, reminding him that winter had fully claimed the land. He remained there for a moment longer, hands resting on his knees, gathering himself. Today was not an ordinary winter day. He knew, even before the servants arrived, that the hours ahead would carry a different weight. The knowledge had followed him into sleep and lingered there, quiet but insistent. A feast would be held tonight in the great hall, not one of casual celebration, but one arranged with intention. A guest from a distant castle was expected by evening, having traveled through snow and frozen roads to reach these walls. The king rose and crossed the chamber slowly. He poured water from a clay pitcher into a shallow basin and rinsed his face, the cold biting against his skin. He welcomed the sensation. It cleared the lingering softness of sleep and sharpened his thoughts. He dried his hands on a folded cloth and moved to the hearth, extending his palms toward the lively fire. The warmth flowed into him while flames gently danced across the stone, casting golden highlights that chased the shadows along the walls. He watched the flames flicker, feeling a quiet assurance that the day could begin. As he stood there, watching the fire, he allowed his thoughts to drift briefly toward the coming evening. The guest was not unknown to him. Their castles had stood on opposite edges of the realm for generations, connected by shared winters and old histories. They were not enemies, but neither were they close allies. The visit had been arranged carefully, with letters exchanged over many weeks. Every word had been chosen with care. Tonight's feast would honor that distance and attempt perhaps to narrow it. A quiet knock sounded at the chamber door. Without waiting for an answer, a servant entered, moving with practiced care. He bowed and crossed the room to tend the fire, stirring the logs so that flames danced higher, sending sparks into the hearth. Another servant followed, carrying folded garments over one arm. The king acknowledged them with a nod and turned back toward the window. Daylight had begun to take hold. The sky was pale and heavy with cloud, reflecting the snow below, so that the world beyond the glass seemed almost luminous in its whiteness. He watched as flakes continued to fall, softening every sharp edge of stone and wood. Behind him, fabric shifted softly. When he turned, the garments had been laid out carefully on a wooden bench near the hearth. One was simple, a heavy wool tunic in dark, familiar colors, worn thin in places from years of use. It was warm, comfortable, and unremarkable, a garment for an ordinary winter day. The other was different. This one was heavier, lined with fur at the collar and cuffs. The fabric was finely woven, dyed in deep, restrained tones meant to signal dignity rather than excess. It was the kind of garment worn when appearances mattered, when eyes would be watching closely. The king stood before them in silence. This choice was not ceremonial, but it was meaningful all the same. He understood what each garment would convey. The simpler tunic spoke of routine, of continuity, of a ruler at ease within his own walls. The heavier garment spoke of acknowledgement, of respect shown without spectacle. He reached for the heavier garment. As the servant helped him dress, the weight settled comfortably across his shoulders, the fur collar warm against his neck. It was not ostentatious, but it carried presence. The king studied his reflection briefly in the polished metal mirror mounted beside the hearth. He appeared composed, steady, prepared for the day ahead. Once the servants departed, he lingered by the window again. Below, the courtyard lay untouched, snow filling in old footprints and smoothing the stones into a pale, quiet expanse. Soon enough, the castle would stir fully. Fires would be stoked, tables prepared, halls swept clean in anticipation of the evening's gathering. For now, though, the morning belonged to him. He rested one hand against the cold stone of the wall and watched the snow fall, feeling the quiet certainty of the day settle into place. The feast would come. The guest would arrive. Words would be spoken, and others would listen closely. But this moment, this stillness, this winter silence warmed by the lively fire was his alone. And with that, the king turned from the window and stepped toward the door, ready to begin the day. The king moved through the chamber with quiet deliberation. The fur-lined collar brushed against his neck, warm and grounding, a small reminder of the hearth and the fire that still danced in the hearth behind him. He stepped into the corridor, boots pressing lightly against the cold stone floor. Torches flared softly along the walls, their flames mirrored by the dancing shadows from the fire still burning behind him. The air carried a faint scent of smoke, polished wood, and the subtle tang of winter outside. Each breath reminded him of the chill beyond the castle, a cold so sharp it made warmth feel like treasure. The halls were empty, but life was stirring. Servants moved silently, arranging tapestries and brushing dust from the long tables in the great hall. The hall would soon be prepared for tonight's feast, a gathering meant to honor the guest who had traveled from a distant castle. Though it would be a quiet and measured event, the preparations themselves carried an unspoken significance. Every carefully folded cloth, every polished goblet, was a signal of attention, of care, and of the weight that hospitality carried in these walls. He paused briefly by the library. The room smelled of old parchment and polished wood, shelves lined with books that had seen centuries pass by. He ran his fingers over the spines of several volumes, their textures worn smooth by the hands of scholars and readers long gone. One could imagine the countless stories held within these pages, stories of winter, of distant lands, of kings and queens who had walked these corridors before him. He allowed his eyes to linger on them for a moment, appreciating both their quiet presence and the weight of history they carried. Continuing through the castle, he moved past the armory. The metal of the swords and axes gleamed faintly in the torchlight, but there was no movement here, no clamor of training or battle. The weapons rested as they had for decades, reminders of power and protection. But in this morning, they were simply objects, their readiness silent, unobtrusive. He noted the way the firelight glanced off polished steel and brass, the way each shadow shifted and lengthened as he passed. The castle was alive in small, deliberate ways, and he moved through it as part of that rhythm. He stepped briefly into the courtyard, where snow had gathered overnight in soft drifts. Footprints from the night had been erased by the falling flakes, leaving the stone beneath a pale, unbroken expanse. The chill bit at his cheeks, but the fur lining of his cloak kept him warm. He looked up at the towers surrounding him, the battlements outlined in frost, and imagined the distant guest arriving, the wheels of carriage and hoofbeats crunching through snow to bring them here. The thought was both mundane and remarkable, a quiet thrill in the anticipation of their arrival. Turning back toward the castle, the king passed a servant arranging a tapestry in the great hall. The tapestry depicted a winter hunt, horses and hounds moving across a snowy landscape, figures rendered in deep blues and warm browns. He paused to admire it. The artist had captured both motion and stillness, and he reflected on how the hall itself, like the tapestry, would host motion tonight in the form of the feast, yet remain measured and controlled. His path took him past the kitchens, where the scent of bread baking mingled with roasted vegetables and warming stews. Servants moved efficiently, without chatter, stirring pots and tending fires. The smells were rich and promising, though the king did not linger long. Instead, he allowed the aroma to follow him as he continued toward the solar, a private chamber where he would gather his thoughts before the day fully unfolded. Here, he paused once more, his gaze drifting toward the fire that had been lit anew in the solar. The flames leapt and flickered, casting golden light across tapestries and furniture. It was a lively fire, alive with movement, and it warmed not only the stone of the chamber, but the air around him, carrying a sense of security and constancy. He watched the flames, noting their motion, their subtle unpredictability, and found in them a rhythm that steadied his mind. The thought of the evening weighed gently on him. The guest from the distant castle had traveled through cold, unfamiliar roads, and the preparations, though quiet and controlled, were designed to honor them. Each detail mattered. The arrangement of chairs, the placement of candles, the careful folding of linens. These small attentions, invisible to many, spoke volumes about the priorities and temperament of the king himself. He allowed himself a brief smile as he considered the moment when the guest would finally arrive. There would be greetings, measured words exchanged, and the warmth of the hall would contrast sharply with the snow outside. He imagined the firelight reflecting off polished surfaces, the subtle movement of shadows, the gentle murmur of conversation restrained but attentive. It would be an evening of quiet observation, and he would move through it with calm purpose, noting what was said and unsaid alike. Finally, he turned toward the staircase that led to his chambers above the great hall. He paused midway, resting a hand against the cold stone of the wall. The snow outside continued to fall, heavy but gentle, blanketing the castle grounds in silence. The king descended the final steps and moved toward the day's first duties. Servants, the castle, and the unfolding feast waited, but for this moment, he allowed himself the luxury of quiet observation. The world beyond the walls was cold, but inside, warmth and anticipation moved in tandem, guiding each step he took. And so the morning unfolded, deliberate and measured, each movement carrying weight and purpose, each breath drawing him closer to the day that would culminate in firelight, snow, and the presence of a distant guest. The great hall glowed warmly, firelight reflecting off polished wooden tables and the gilded edges of tall candlesticks. Flames leapt and flickered, lively and golden, sending shadows dancing across the high stone walls. Snow pressed softly against the tall windows, a pale curtain muffling the sounds of the world beyond. The air carried the rich scent of roasted vegetables, freshly baked bread, and warming stews, mingling with the faint tang of the winter smoke drifting from the hearths. The king entered the hall, his garments settled comfortably over his shoulders. His boots made no sound against the polished floor as he moved toward the head of the table. Servants shifted with quiet precision, adjusting candlesticks and folding napkins with care. Each movement, deliberate yet unobtrusive, seemed designed to underscore the importance of the evening, without creating noise or distraction. Tonight the hall was filled not with ordinary company, but with expectation. The doors at the far end of the hall opened quietly, and the guest entered. Their presence was immediate but not loud, a figure wrapped in travel-worn furs, carrying the subtle weight of a long journey. Servants stepped aside, guiding them toward the head of the table, while the king rose briefly to meet them with a nod of acknowledgement. No words were exchanged yet, only measured gestures that spoke volumes, respect, awareness, and careful attention to etiquette. As the guests took their place, the king observed the subtle details, the way their cloak fell across the chair, the slight shimmer of frost in the edges of their garments, the way the firelight reflected in their eyes. Each movement, each glance conveyed something unspoken. The warmth of the hall contrasted sharply with the snow pressing against the windows, yet the guest appeared composed, attentive, and unshaken. Servants moved down the table, serving food in precise, deliberate portions. The rich aroma of stews and bread filled the air as platters were passed quietly. Conversation remained soft, punctuated by measured tones rather than laughter or clamor. Guests exchanged small greetings, eyes bright with interest yet restrained, aware that tonight was not merely a meal but a ceremony of observation and subtle diplomacy. The king allowed his gaze to move slowly over the hall. Each servant, each guest, each detail of arrangement, the polished silver, the carefully folded linens, the golden glow of the candles, carried significance. He noted the way the snow outside softened the world, how the firelight made the stone walls seem alive with movement, and how the shadows danced across the floor and ceiling. Everything was part of a rhythm, a quiet choreography designed to honor the guest and the occasion. As the meal progressed, the king engaged in minimal but meaningful interaction. A word here, a nod there, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement. Each exchange was deliberate, carefully measured, designed to convey respect and attentiveness without drawing unnecessary attention. The guest responded in kind, their movements and words measured yet purposeful, maintaining the balance of decorum that framed the entire evening. Through it all, the snow fell steadily beyond the windows, covering the courtyard in white, softening the world into silence. The flames of the hearth flickered lively and warm, providing both light and reassurance as the evening unfolded. The feast continued with quiet ceremony, the king observing, listening, and moving with intention. Every detail, every gesture, every flicker of flame contributed to the sense that this was a moment of significance, quietly acknowledged yet deeply felt. And in that warmth, surrounded by firelight and snow, the king allowed himself to enjoy the simple satisfaction of the evening unfolding exactly as it should. The feast had concluded successfully. The guest had departed quietly, carriage wheels crunching over snowed paths as they left the castle grounds, and the great hall was now empty of all but servants. Candles burned low, their flames flickering softly across polished wood and stone. The remaining servants moved with careful precision, clearing dishes and folding linens, their movements echoing the deliberate calm that had marked the evening. The king lingered for a moment, standing near the hearth. He looked over the tables, noting the traces of the evening. Platters had been cleared, goblets polished, candles dwindled to tiny flames. Yet the hall still held the memory of the feast, of careful gestures, and the unspoken conversations of respect and observation. Each detail, though small, carried significance, and the king allowed a brief smile. The evening had unfolded as it should, dignified and deliberate, yet alive with subtle meaning. As he moved through the hall, the warmth of the fire followed him, flowing across the stone and filling the space with a comforting glow. He felt the lingering warmth from the fur-lined garment he had worn earlier, a reminder of the care and attention that had marked the day. Outside, snow lay thick, but inside, light and heat moved freely, painting walls and floor with shifting patterns of flame and shadow. He ascended the staircase to his private chambers, each step echoing softly in the silent castle. The stone underfoot was cold, yet the air carried the residual warmth of the hearths below. At the top, he paused to glance back at the great hall one last time. The fire continued to flicker, lively and warm, marking the rhythm of the castle as though it were a living companion to the night. Inside his chamber, he removed the ceremonial garment, folding it carefully and placing it on the wooden bench beside the hearth. The fur lining brushed his fingers, a tactile memory of the day's dignity and purpose. The simpler tunic was hung nearby, oath garments resting quietly, waiting for the return of routine and ordinary days. He approached the fire, letting the warmth seep through his hands and shoulders. The flames danced high and lively, painting golden patterns across the walls. He allowed his thoughts to drift, recalling the quiet exchanges with the guest, the attentive gestures, the subtle currents of respect and acknowledgement. The evening had been measured and deliberate, but its significance lingered pleasantly in the warmth of the room. Finally, he approached his bed. Heavy blankets awaited, warm and comforting against the cold of the stone chamber. He lay down, the quiet of the castle pressing gently around him. The fire in the hearth flickered lively and golden, sending one last cascade of warmth across the room before settling into a soft glow. Snow continued to fall outside, unceasing and gentle, a lullaby for the night. And in that quiet, surrounded by the fire's warm glow and the steady rhythm of winter, the king allowed himself to rest. The day had carried weight and significance, yet it had passed, leaving only warmth, reflection, and the gentle promise of tomorrow.